Who's that guy? I came home, I got done working at about, I'd say I got home about 2 a.m. and the moment I walked in the door, it was like I'd been gone for a year. Look, he's sniffing his own tail. What a weirdo. Oh, chasing his own tail. Get it, Jaw. Get it. Get it. Yeah, I walk in and he goes absolutely berserk. He was fighting me. I was literally laying in bed trying to go to sleep, and I could feel him like spinning around the bed. What he does when he wants to fight. So I had to fight him in the dark last night for fun. Didn't I? What are you messing with your tail for, you wackadoo? Hey, Jaw. I just wanted to see your face. Here's my St. Patrick's Day shirt for the day. When I used to go to Kimmel all the time, the announcer of Jimmy Kimmel Live is Dickie Barrett, and he's the lead singer of the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And every day that he would see me, we would talk basketball because he knew I was a big basketball fan. He's a big Celtics guy, I'm a big Clipper guy. But we would always talk because I like the Celtics as well. And one day he walked out and handed me this shirt, and he's like, I figured maybe you'd appreciate it. And it's Paul Pierce when he was on the Celtics in a Mighty Mighty Boss Tone shirt. They're kind of hard to find. I'd never seen one before like it or since. I'm gonna go drop this guy off at his buddy's house while I go vlogging today. And there's no real specific St. Patrick's Day theme to today's vlog. The only green we're gonna be talking about is marijuana, because the topic of today's vlog is the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson and the apartment he lived in when he was experimenting with marijuana and LSD. He's the aggressor. That's what's funny. She's not bothering anybody. He's down there biting on her and licking her. She loves it. Sorry guys, I forgot to shave today. I slept in because I had done that night call and work so late last night that I ended up not going to bed till like 4, and then when I woke up, Jaw was just itching to get outside and go do something, so I was just in the haste, I forgot to shave. So anyway, I'm pretty much like right around the corner from where we're gonna do the vlog today. And if I told you before, the very first kind of attraction thing that I looked up when I moved out here in this kind of vein was the Karate Kid apartment and the Karate Kid high school. But right when I moved here, I started reading up a lot on Brian Wilson. I was watching a lot of Brian Wilson documentaries and various things, and this place over here was one that he talked about quite a bit, even though he only lived here a year. This was kind of a real defining point in the future of the Beach Boys, and so I thought, even though the apartment's not here, I still wanted to show you where it was and tell you the stories, because a lot of what's still here does play into the story. Well, this is the Gardner Fire Station. And in 1960, well, basically the very end, we're talking like December of 1964, till about December of 1965, Brian Wilson lived in a duplex right here. He was 22 years old. This was his second apartment in Hollywood from moving out from his parents' house. And he shortly, literally right before they moved in here, had married his very young girlfriend, Marilyn. I will go into more detail about her. I'm doing a lot of these vlogs on Brian Wilson out of kind of a time sequence, but he had met her when he first moved here. She would come out and see him perform, and he would go see her little like band perform at the Pandora's Box. And she was young and had a sister, and he just fell in love with the family and ended up marrying her really young. I think he met her when she was 16. But anyway, So he lived in this apartment during that time. And this was really like kind of the real takeoff of the Beach Boys, because they were already successful, they already had hits, but when he moved into here was the era of when he was, he had decided that he was kind of over the whole like surfing thing. That being the music. And what he really wanted to do is he was just looking to make something that was not so easy to kind of like lump in. Like he wanted to be like the Beatles, where it was very eclectic. And during the time that he lived here, he met a guy named Lauren Schwartz. And Lauren Schwartz was kind of a mover and shaker in the music scene. He was a like an agent assistant at William Morris, and he knew a lot of people that impressed Brian. Like he would hang out with David Crosby and Stephen Stills and people like that. And so Brian really didn't have a whole lot of friends when he was over here, because Brian, his dad was just a real piece of garbage. He really abused him his whole life, and throughout his whole life told him that he was nothing, told him he was a loser. And so Brian basically spent his entire life trying to prove to his dad that he wasn't a loser, even after his dad was gone. So while he was here and he met Lauren Schwartz opened his mind up to the idea of, hey, maybe you should try smoking pot. And the only thing Brian knew about pot was that his dad had always told him it was bad and it was horrible and it was evil and it would turn you into a monster. And anything that his dad was against, Brian was kind of interested in. So right at this time, Brian was really kind of stressing out a lot, because he was basically the sole writer for the Beach Boys. And he constantly had his dad call in because they had fired their dad as being their manager, and he kept making up this story telling Brian that Brian had promised to sign over the publishing company Sea of Tunes to him, and just would not let up. He would call him every couple of months. Hey, you need to make good on your promise. When you said in the living room, your mom saw it, knowing that the mom would never go against the father. And Brian would get into arguments with him. And while he was here, this is where Brian just decided to let loose. Lauren Schwartz introduced him to smoking pot. He lived in the neighborhood, so they walked over to Lauren's house. Brian smoked pot, and he loved it. It just opened his whole world up. He said that he saw colors in the music. He heard a wall of sound in the music that he'd never heard before. He really had a new take on things. And one of the things that he said was that he didn't really like living in this apartment because the fire engines going off all the time, every time they would come out here and the sirens going off, would freak him out. So he went ahead and smoked pot, loved it, came home. And when he walked in, his wife Marilyn could immediately tell something was off. He had glassy eyes and various different things. And she said, "What have you done?" And he said, "I smoked pot. I loved it." And she immediately freaked out, told him that he shouldn't be doing that. Basically, within a few days of him doing this, the Beach Boys were supposed to take off on a tour. And he and Marilyn were riding in a limousine on the way to the airport. And when they got to the airport, they met up with the other guys, Al Jardine, Mike Love, Dennis, Carl, everybody that was in the band. And Brian got super paranoid and thought that his wife and Mike Love were making eyes at each other. And he started accusing her of it in the car. And she kept saying, "I don't like Mike. Mike's not my type." And Mike loved to get under Brian's skin. So Brian starts going, "Why? What's wrong with me? I should be everybody's type." Really just kind of infuriating him. So when they got to the airport, Brian was like, "I'm not going. I don't want to go. I don't want to fly out." So they talk him into flying out. He gets on the plane. The moment the plane takes off, he starts freaking out and decides he wants to get off the plane immediately. And they try and calm him down. The stewardess try and calm him down. He gets up and runs through the airplane screaming. His brothers, Carl and Dennis, end up tackling him and restraining him and kind of like keeping him subdued until they land. But then when they land, he doesn't want to get off the plane. He tells the stewardess, he's like, "Just turn the plane around, take me back to Los Angeles. I don't want to be here, I want to go home." So then they have to find a way of coercing him off the plane. So they finally coerce him off the plane. They get him to the hotel where they're staying, and then he doesn't want to leave the hotel room. So they end up basically having to get one of the handlers that would travel with them to just go to the hotel and tell Brian, hey, we're taking you home. And so he escorted him to the airport. Brian flew back, and when he flew back, he said he wanted his mom to be waiting for him at the airport, and his mom only. He was never really that close to his mom, but he always needed a mother, like that motherly attention. And that's what his wife ended up really basically playing the role of, being his mother. So after this whole episode happened, Brian started getting weed and smoking weed on a regular basis. And he really loved it. And Marilyn hated it. He would do it behind her back, even when she would tell him she was gonna leave or she was gonna get a separation or get her own apartment or something. He would say he was gonna quit, and then he would just ignore her, because he said once he started smoking pot, he learned how to manipulate people. He learned what he could do and how to turn on the tears, and he could manipulate her. And so, and he knew if he did that, she would never tell any of his brothers or bandmates that he was doing drugs. But it was also at this time that when he came back, he was smoking pot, and he just decided one day to call a band meeting. And he said that was not uncommon. He would call a band meeting any time of the day he felt like it. Anytime he wrote a song, the band members knew that they might get a call at 4 a.m. and he called everybody in. Sat him down and said, I am no longer gonna tour. I am gonna stay home and I'm gonna make the music. You guys can tour on it, and when you come back into town, all the tracks will be laid down, the songs will be written, all you have to do is add your voice. And most of the band flipped out on him. They thought this was a stupid move. They thought it was gonna end the band. But he knew that this was really the only way he could function. He said flat out, I can't write on the road, I don't want to be on the road, and I'm not going to do it anymore. So they ended up hiring Glenn Campbell, and Glenn Campbell took over Brian's parts. He was a great guitar player, he had a great falsetto, but he only stayed in the band for a few months because, like Brian said, he was just way too talented. He was way too talented to be like a backup guy. So Brian ended up actually producing Glenn Campbell's first single. It wasn't a hit or anything, but so while he was here, Marilyn basically just kept saying, I don't want you hanging out with Lauren Schwartz. Lauren Schwartz is a bad influence on you. So the more she said that, the more Brian wanted to hang out with Lauren Schwartz. Meanwhile, having the band members mad at him because he didn't want to tour anymore, being 22 years old and making 10 albums in the span of 3 years, having all these hit songs, he was just cracking. He literally was just cracking. It was just too much pressure for one young boy to take on, and he felt like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. So one day Lauren comes over and says, Brian, maybe you should take LSD. And Brian's like, what's LSD? Never even heard of it. And Lauren basically said, well, you know how when you smoked marijuana, you could see colors and you heard more instruments? When you do LSD, you can physically grab the music and you can pick it up in lumps and chunks and move it around, and you can play with it and you can throw it into the sky and watch it burst. And like, just all this made Brian just kind of like made him real, because like I said, he really kind of looked up to Lauren Schwartz because he didn't have a whole lot of friends, and Lauren was somebody who and incidentally, that is a duplex right there. That's kind of like what Brian lived in when he lived right behind me. So anyway, Lauren was just a guy that Brian kind of admired, so Brian decided to go over to Lauren's and do LSD. He did LSD, and he said he immediately didn't like it, but then all of a sudden he did like it. And he said what felt like 5 minutes he sat there, Lauren said actually was over an hour that Brian just sat there in a daze looking at things. And he said he sat down at a piano and he could only play one note. He just kept playing an A, like a bong, bong. But it was right after this experience of him doing the LSD, he came home and Marilyn could tell something was off, and she's like, have you been smoking marijuana again? And he said, no, I did LSD and I saw God. And she said, Brian, I don't want anything to do with this. And he said, but Marilyn, I want you to see God too. And she said, I don't want to see God. Now this was the era of Brian was still writing all the music, and he said this was the first time he would ever write music high. He wrote Please Let Me Wonder, which is one of my favorites. He wrote Help Me Rhonda, Dance, Dance, Dance. Basically the whole Beach Boys party album, Beach Boys Today, was all done here, all those singles. And then he said he didn't really want to do acid ever again, but after a few weeks something got into him and he was compelled to want to do it again. And so he went, they actually did it over here at this apartment, and he said the moment the LSD kicked in, Lauren said that Brian stood up, grabbed his keys, and ran out of the house. And actually what he had done was he ran to over to Marilyn's parents' house, his wife's parents' house, thought that he would like see them. They were basically like surrogate parents to him, but instead Marilyn's sister was there watching TV on the couch. Brian was so out of it that he didn't realize who it was, and he like starts like kissing her and telling her he was in love with her and basically acting really crazy. But he said when he came home the very next day, he sat down at his piano inside this apartment and he started playing this kind of like cowboy don't do don't do don't do don't do don't. And he said I just kept playing it, and he said, and then kind of true to how I wrote about like all the surfing spots in Surfing USA, he said all of a sudden I just started thinking about all the different women and all the different women around the country and the women in New York, and next thing you know, he had written California Girls. So he wrote California Girls, Help Me Rhonda, Please Let Me Wonder, all those in this place, in this apartment. And basically his only job was he would write all these songs, and then he would go down to Western Recorders or Gold Star Studios, whoever it was that he was citing. And that became kind of an issue because he had always recorded at Western. That was like his preferred studio. But he started wanting to do recording at Gold Star because he said that he didn't think that Western could handle the amount of musicians he wanted to use, and he wanted to start using Phil Spector's Wrecking Crew. So basically, when he lived over here, he said that whenever he would smoke pot or whenever he would do LSD, these fire trucks would drive him crazy. And that would actually later on be the inspiration for the song Fires that was on Smile. So he lived here for a while. After his second acid trip, and he went over and had humiliated himself in front of Marilyn's sister. Marilyn had already moved out by that point. She was no longer living here. She got her own apartment, so he went over to her house, or went over to her apartment, begged her to let him in. She wouldn't let him in, and then he just kept begging her at the door, saying that things would be different, and that he wanted to buy a house and he wanted to settle down. And so she believed him, and shortly before he started writing Pet Sounds, he moved out of this place and moved up Laurel Way. Now, the last real big incident that happened here was when Marilyn felt that the smoking pot had gotten out of control. She actually let his father know. And his father was basically like a drill sergeant type personality. And his dad went and got Mike Love and Al Jardine. They showed up over here and they confronted Brian. They actually tore the entire apartment apart until they found his stash, and they found like a shoebox with some marijuana, a grinder, some papers, and then like a lollipop of some sort. And he said when they dumped out the papers in front of him, they're like, "What is this?" He said, I was so used to smoking and doing everything that I didn't even know what he was talking about. He's like, I thought he was talking about the sucker. And basically his dad just kept screaming at him and saying, I ought to call the police on you. And finally Brian just threw them all out and said, I'm gonna do what I want to do. And definitely not the best decision for somebody who had went through all the emotional upbringing that he did. He really had psychological problems, and while he was living here, his wife Marilyn actually requested that he go to a psychiatrist, and he didn't even fight her on it. He said that he would be happy to do that. But right here on Gardner, right across from this fire station, basically in a duplex, kind of similar to this right here. that's actually a bigger apartment building. That's actually a quadplex or something, but he said he had a 2-bedroom apartment right here with his piano in it, and this was where he said that this was the moment when he lived here. That's when all the Beach Boys music went from being this upbeat, happy stuff to being slower, more melodic, more methodical, and really the era that I love the most. Now in the future, I am gonna go do his very first apartment on Hollywood Boulevard and tell some of the stories there. I'm gonna go to his childhood home where that was. I'm gonna go to the house on Laurel Way where he wrote Pet Sounds and Smiley Smile. That's what they released. They released it as Smiley Smile, but it was supposed to be Smile, and there's a whole story behind Smile. But this was a real life-changing street and a real life-changing address in Brian Wilson's life. Like I said, this may be the most impactful place that he ever lived as far as changing his creativity and changing his mind. And in a lot of ways, it was already kind of coming on, but meeting Lauren Schwartz was definitely a push in the direction that the Beach Boys would not be able to stop. I'm enjoying some of this this Seattle chocolates candy that Nick and Jonna sent yesterday. It's pretty awesome. But I'm super happy because I got my buddy Sam Tripoli released a new comedy album today, and it's actually a double discer. It's like, as he calls it, 1 disc of heat, and then 1 disc of him just completely bombing with like a bad audience and just tearing down hecklers. So his girlfriend gave it to me while I was over there, and I'm excited to listen to it. I love Sam's comedy, and I'm always proud of my friends for doing something for their career and releasing something. So good for him. Double discer. There you go. Check him out. Sam Tripoli. Alright, I got a little bit of time, so I decided I'm going to finally sew on this Zappa patch. I couldn't really find a good place on the front. I'm going to keep looking, but I'm thinking right there. I'm thinking right on the very back on the bottom. Actually, maybe that's a better place. Right there, maybe on the other side, balance it out. Well, let me look. Huh. I think maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll put that there, and I'll put my random land pin maybe over here. I don't know. I kind of like the look of the patch right there, next to the Grateful Dead one. Yeah, let's do it like that. Yeah, I think I'm going to do it there. I pinned it into place like they taught me in home ec in 8th grade, so it won't move around, dance around on me. I think that's the place for it. Alright, it's on there. It is on. It ain't coming off. I probably could have got it a little closer up there, but it doesn't look too bad. Look at the sherbert sky. John and I are out for a little evening walk, and I just looked up and I'm like, man, look at that. And there he is. Out looking for his dog friends. Scoping out the neighborhood. Oh, that's even cooler. Check that out. That's even better. Wow. Beautiful.